Okay guys, hi. So this is the next if you like use of marginal costing that we're going to discuss. And this next use discusses or is referred to or looks at what happens when we have scarce resources. And when I say scarce resources, it might be labor, or you might be in your factory and you don't have enough of a resource. And we're in manufacturing, so either it's labor or material or that sort of thing. So let's sort of go to your textbook. In your textbook, we're on page 400, right? And so let's see what they're, just kind of pause this, make sure you're there at page 400. So it's referred to as the optimum use of scarce resource. We're still talking about marginal costing. That's what we're talking about. Right, so what is it saying? Scarce resources or limiting factors. So limiting factors, like I said earlier on, we'll see examples in a second. Scarce resources or limiting factors are those aspects of business which limit output. So because you don't have enough of it, you can't quite satisfy demand the way you want it to, right? And if you didn't have this limiting factor, you could just make as much. So for example, if it was time, I mean, time is always a limiting factor. To a certain extent, people have to go home, so you just can't have them there all the time. And you might not be able to find the right staff, that sort of thing. So typically labor is a very popular limiting factor. Material, to a certain extent, isn't much of a limiting factor, but it could be a run out, but typically labor will always be, to a certain extent, a limiting factor. Even demand could be a limiting factor. Just because you don't have that demand, so you're restricted by the demand for your product, and that is a limiting factor as well. Without limitations, when the business sells more than one product, well, it's usually best to switch output to the one that gives you the highest contribution. So if you have no limiting factors, of course, you make the one that gives you, if you like, even the highest contribution margin, so to speak. So almost like a net profit margin, but a contribution margin. So if you think about the selling price minus the variable cost, you have your contribution. Make the one that gives you the highest C over S, right? Because that's what this is. It's nothing similar to sales minus cost of sales giving you gross profit, and you're saying, oh, the gross profit margin is gross profit over sales. The same idea. The contribution margin is the C over S. Sometimes it's referred to as the C over S ratio. So if you come across a C over S ratio, which we will, that's all it is really. Contribution divided by sales. Right. So it says it is usually best to switch output to the product that gives you the highest contribution. That's if you have no limitation. So in your textbook, let us quickly see what they are telling us. I have some notes. Yes, in your textbook on page 400, please look there. It gives you some examples of scarce resources. So it says examples are availability of materials, availability of skilled labor, availability of productive capacity, so machine hours. It might be storage, and it might be finance, and that sort of thing. And it's again, like I highlight when the paragraph starts, it says at any one time there is usually one main scarce resource. So generally you have a scarce resource, you'll sort that out, and another resource might become scarce. So that's kind of the general trend. Now, a simple rule, let's go, if you like, oh, it's actually on here. So limiting factors include all these things here that I just mentioned. Right. So, what tends to happen, like I said earlier on, first of all, is that we can't really be talking about limiting factors if we haven't even broken even. So again, we only talk about this idea of having scarcity or limiting factors when you're much past your break even. You're done, your fixed costs are covered, we're kind of somewhere here, where we're growth, maturity, we're in the market, right? We're not interested in our fixed costs, which is why these are very, as you can imagine, this must be a short-term decision, because you shouldn't be having a limited resource for a long time. It's just that you have a limited resource, and that's the situation. We just have to see what we can do best in that time, in that situation. Right, and so the argument is that if either material or labor is limited, then we need to determine the optimum production mix. And it really says what the rule is determined. When I say the rule, I'll give you some examples to kind of help you conceptualize clearly, get your head around why it must be to determine the contribution per unit of scarce resource. So it's really saying concentrate on production of the product which gives you the highest contribution per limiting factor. And we'll see an example in a second. So what they're really saying, let me just do an example and then you'll see where I'm going with this. Please turn in your textbook, and I'll give you some other examples, but just turn this in your textbook. Just go to page 401 so you can see what they're trying to ask. So you might get it from here, but if not, I'll give you another example. And have a quick read of the scenario. And the company is called Sound System. It tells you Sound System, and you can pause this so you can have a quick read. Sound System is a small company that make radios. They make two types of radios. So it tells you that they make what's referred to as the Windsor and the Buckingham. And the Windsor gives you have a selling price per unit of 50, variable cost of 30, and a contribution of 20. And here we have 100, and we have 70, and we have 30. So on the face of it, this sort of makes sense to make, well, to be honest, what you probably think, if you like, is the one that's giving you the highest ratio. If you like, which one is giving you the highest gross profit margin? The gross profit, the contribution margin really is 20 divided by 50, right? Because, well, that's the ratio, that's sales. 20 divided by 50 is 4%, 30 divided by 100 is 30%. I mean, again, remember that when you're analyzing your ratios, when you're doing ratios, what you're saying is that looking at the naked number is actually ridiculous. There's no point looking at the naked number when you're doing any kind of analysis, because the naked number is really irrelevant. So if you have 30, yes, but this time you imagine you had to spend 70 to get 100. And then look at this guy. If you did two radios, it would be what? That's what you would have, right? 100 and 60, and this would be 40. So this guy definitely is the better product if you like to be making based on the contribution to sales ratio. So the whole point of ratio analysis is to stop us from using naked numbers and compare contribution to sales or profit to sales. That's what you're really interested in, right? Profit to sales. Okay, right. So this is what this is telling us. So if we had all the resources in the world, make as many Windsors as you can. But when you now have a scarce resource, for example, and you only have, in this case, they tell you that if you look later on, it tells you that each radio takes 2 hours to make. Each radio takes 2 hours to make. And it tells you the number of direct labor hours are 260. So you only have 260 hours available. Well, I guess the question is, let's see, what's the demand for these radios? Well, people want 100 of these, 100 Windsors, and they want 80 Buckingham radios. So if I'm going to produce both, well, I would need 200 hours to make my Windsors, because it takes 2 hours to make a Windsor. And I would need 160 hours to make my Buckingham. So I need 360 hours, but I only have 260. So we have a problem. So really, it means I therefore need to make, in this case of scarcity, I need to make the radio that gives me the highest contribution per scarce resource. And the one that gives me the highest contribution per scarce resource, if you think about it, since it takes 2 hours to make each radio, if this is the contribution of Windsor, well, what we do is, if you look further down at the bottom of that page of 401, you can see that what they have done is they have said, well, they've created another little chart. What's the contribution for the Windsor? 20. What's the contribution for the Buckingham? 30. Okay. How many hours does it take to make this thing? 2. And here as well, 2. So what's the contribution per scarce resource? Well, when I say contribution per one, what's the contribution per hour? What does an hour, how much contribution does investing an hour into a Windsor yield, so to speak? 20 divided by 2. So it's £10 an hour. So every time you spend making a Windsor, you get £10 of contribution. Every time you spend making a Buckingham, you get £15 an hour. I mean, that should naturally make sense. You can just see what's going on here. This only occurs in the short term when we have a scarce resource. If we had all the labor hours in the world, we would have been making Windsors because they give us the highest contribution the highest contribution the contribution ratio, contribution to sales ratio. And so we do this thing here where we say we do what we call a ranking, and we say, well, we're going to make this first, and then we're going to make this. So if I'm going to make Buckinghams first, I need to make 80 Buckinghams, so I need 160 hours. That's fine. I'll make all my Buckinghams. Perfect. I have 100 hours left. And if it takes 2 hours to make a Windsor, that means I can only make 50 Windsors. Right? I can only make 50 Windsors. So that's fine. So that's a scenario. And if you were asked to work out what the profit is of this thing, well, I know what the contribution is for every Buckingham. So the contribution for Buckingham is 30. I'm making 80, so that's 240. I know what the contribution is for the Windsors. I'm making 50 times 20, which is 100. So my total contribution is the 240 plus the 100, which gives me 340. And then you take away, if you like, 20, I keep doing this. This is 2,400 and this is 1,000. So this is 3,400. And then it tells you clearly that your fixed overheads are 2,000. If you look on that page in the middle bit, it gives you where you have all the details. And so then you have that, and therefore your profit is 1,400. So I'll stop here and I'll go out. There's a part 2 to this video, but the key point here is this: in the short term, when there's a scarce resource, make the product that gives you the highest contribution per limiting factor. And how do I do that? Find the contribution of each of them. Find the contribution to the scarce resource. Rank them. 1 or 2. Make that one first. Then use whatever hours are left to make the other. And you're there at the answer. I will do this a second part of this video just to clarify a few things and talk about some of the unfortunate disadvantages of going with this process. But remember, this is in the short term. Okay, great stuff. See you in the next video.